All right, g'day, g'day. Welcome back to Collectivitis podcast, where we dissect the disease that is collectivism. My name is Pietro. Joining us today, we have Paul Barker, who is a Libertarian Councillor for the Surf Coast Shire. Is that correct, Paul?
That is correct.
I've made no mistakes thus far. That's good. That's a good start. Um, Now, Paul, you are. Sorry, let me ask you first of all, what does Paul Barker, John Ruddick, David Limbrick, Spike Cohen, Matt Wong, Jordan Ditloff. What do all these people have in common, do you think?
A distrust of government.
Wrong. They are all people who have been guests on Collectivitis more than once. You have now
Oh,
joined
yeah.
the illustrious list of people who have come onto Collectivitis more than once. So congratulations. More than happy to have you. So you are, I mean, I don't know how much council elections really take. People notice council elections as much as they notice other elections, but for those who do pay attention, we have council elections coming up here in Victoria, and
Yes,
you are seeking re-election to council. So this would be your second term as a councillor. Is that correct?
correct.
Yeah. So when are those happening? These council elections?
Late October via a postal system. People get mailed out a ballot and information and photos from the candidates that have nominated. And then they'll be able to, in their own time, spend as much or as little time going over all of the candidate statements, doing their own research or not, and voting or not, and sending the ballot back to the VEC.
So I mean, I must admit I don't pay too much attention to council compared to what I pay to the other elections. So um, could you mind running us over a little bit? So, in the scope of, okay, federal government, state government, local councils, what is the purview of councils? What are councils tasked with doing? And then what can they do? What sort of power does a council have over people's lives?
They've got very little power, but they can do just about whatever they want.
What does that mean? Whatever they want.
If they want to interject themselves into the conflict in the Middle East, or offshore drilling, or any other sort of social pet project that they can have their say.
Okay, that doesn't sound very local council to me, interjecting themselves into into a conflict in the Middle East. What does that look like if a council interjects itself in some of these global affairs that shouldn't have anything to do with them?
So, as an example from my experience on the Surf Coast, a petition with a couple of dozen signatures came through, and council, on that desire from the community, chose to pass a motion to have a say on the Gaza conflict.
Okay, right. But and what does that? I mean, what does that do? Like, so now
Nothing.
the Surf Coast Council has come out and demanded a ceasefire or something. Is that
It involves public servants on ratepayer time, spending time drafting up a report, more than likely engaging with the Department of Foreign Affairs, speaking with a federal government employee in DFAT that is probably wondering why they are getting communications from a local council, uh, just eating into the budget in a rate capped environment, which means that those resources have been taken off something that could have otherwise been focused on the local area.
okay? This is starting to sound pretty dirty, pretty rotten, pretty bureaucratic. Um, Now you wouldn't have exact figures, I imagine, but what's like if you had to give me an idea of like how much of council's time and council's effort and council's resources goes towards this kind of stuff?
This kind of stuff, not a lot,
Okay.
but it's all the other bits and bobs. So council's a funny one where it's probably similar to state or federal government, where it's not the elected representatives going, I want to employ a international liaison. I want to employ a senior manager in this role. What the elected reps do is pass policy that then empowers the portfolio managers or bureaucrat senior staff to create these positions to fill and to fulfill that policy.
Okay, right. So how much? Okay, given that there's quite a bit of waste, there's quite a bit of inefficient use of time and spending and whatnot.
There is opportunity for improvement.
I love that. Okay, let's call it opportunity for improvement. This opportunity for improvement. So what is it that a council should be doing? Like let's say in an ideal world where a council only concerns itself with, the things that most people associate council with. Like what are the actual jobs? What are the purviews? What is it that council like what is its mandate?
I'll give you two examples. One is my libertarian position,
Okay.
and that is nothing. I'd love to abolish councils, create more small estates that ensures the taxation stays as close as possible to the source. But
Okay.
in pragmatic terms, given the structure that we've got, I would much rather see councils, and not just me, I've put out plenty of surveys and spoken to local community members, business owners. The focus, given the current structure, should be looking after the roads, looking after the parks, looking after the waste management. And in my non-purist libertarian position, managing the planning scheme to balance the desires of the community.
Okay. Do you think they're currently achieving these goals?
What is your threshold for a pass mark?
Well, okay.
50%, 75%?
75% of what? Like
Like,
what's the
your question was, are we achieving these things? We need to
Yes.
work out what the benchmark is.
Well, like, do you think council is adequately maintaining roads? Do you think, for example?
Mostly okay.
Okay, right. So they're not completely ineffective. Councils are doing
Correct.
some
Yeah.
things. Okay, right.
Like, you've actually got a lot of really good workers in councils on the front line doing the good jobs, but often the resourcing that they require is not balanced in a way that I would agree with.
Okay, because the way I kind of look at council is, um, in the scheme of politicians and elected members and whatnot, it is a much more unglamorous role and an unglamorous position to be a councillor because, uh, I mean, the workload is probably significantly higher than the amount of remuneration that you get. Like comparatively, you don't get the same fame, esteem, and all the rest of it that a state member or a federal member gets. And so it tends to have people who have the interest of the community genuinely run for these kind of things. Lots of people, who just want
Correct.
to see their local area improved, and they see something wrong, and they think I could help something to fix this. There's less of the vested interest of, I want to make a career out of this. I want the glory. I want the personal adulation of being a politician. Would you say
Uh,
that's accurate?
are you suggesting a work week of 10 to 20 hours per week on $30,000 a year is not illustrious?
Yes, and I'm saying that I'm suggesting that attracts, in general, people who are more genuine, I guess, who genuinely want to help and genuinely are getting into this for the right reasons, or what we would consider the right reasons to get into politics. Would you say
I,
that's
I,
accurate?
I think so. The only caveat on that is that because of the remuneration and the time commitment, I think we see a lost opportunity where there are many great corporate leaders, strategic thinkers that do not run for this
Okay.
position, which reduces the quality of the pool that voters have to choose from.
Okay, right. Like, why would I give up my high power, high paying job
Yeah,
to do something for, more work and less money, that kind of thing?
correct.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm starting to get a bit of a picture. So what does okay, let's go back to the libertarian point of view. And I mean, you've already given your libertarian answer being that the council would not simply exist, right? But you
Yes,
are one libertarian councillor. I'm assuming you're the only libertarian councillor currently in the Surf Coast Shire Council.
correct.
And I can't imagine there's very many libertarians currently in councils around Victoria. I know that this year there is much more of a push from libertarians trying to get elected. I've seen several quite good ones, and I think a lot of that is due to the growth of the Libertarian Party and just general appreciation for libertarian ideals over the last few years. Um, so what good could a council that is comprised of, I don't know, a majority of libertarians or uh, maybe even just two or three good ones within the same room. What could that council look like? What would that do?
Really depends on the makeup of the rest of the council. So let's say there were two or three libertarians and the rest were all authoritarian, left-leaning councillors.
Okay.
There'd be a much better pushback and articulation against the direction of what that council would be aiming to achieve. But if there was some other similarly aligned people elected, I think you could turn things around pretty quickly.
Okay. So and I mean I've heard, and I know certainly in some councils, because some councils are notorious for this, but that they are dominated or at least largely populated by these left-leaning ideologues. Um, so is that true? Are councils typically, or at least in your experience, are councils typically dominated by these sort of authoritarians? Um, and why do you think that might be, if that is true?
I think that if you look at what small amount of local papers exist, if they are adequately reporting on what council does, would show that the majority of Victorian councillors are dominated by left authoritarian ideology. What was the second part to the question?
And why do you think that is? Why do you think they are so heavily
I,
populated by these people?
I think because you've got three my observation is you've got three cohorts of people. Those that want to be left alone, which I would class as the silent majority, which I think you and I are a part of. You've then got those that want to control others and those that want to be controlled. Now, those two latter cohorts are often very vocal. So I think can sometimes appear to be larger in the community as a proportion of the community than what they actually are. And because they're quite vocal, they might get media attention or influence in some other way. I think you end up getting some people who want to be left alone supporting that ideology because who doesn't want to be a part of the winning team? And if they're getting exposure, go with that. That's compounded by the fact that most people who want to be left alone don't run for any sort of level of politics, leaving that pool of candidates to be quite small in comparison. So you end up with tickets that are largely dominated, as you would have seen in any state or federal election. The left-aligned parties that are not major are often outnumbering those on the other side.
Yeah.
So when you've got that sort of a field dominance when it comes to preference distribution that some people would know about, just through natural attrition, you end up with a skewed balance where my personal view is that governments at every level don't actually represent their constituencies very well because they don't have that accurate representation balance.
Okay. Um, so let me cycle back. You said so you believe that the silent majority are people who want to be left alone, and yet because of either political disinterest or whatever. They pay attention to whatever the loudest voices are, or ticket saturation from the left. They're the representatives that would best suit their goals are not getting elected. So it's an issue of trying to reach those people and trying to have some message that resonates with them so that they vote actually in their best interest rather than whatever obfuscation the others create. Um, and I think that ties nicely into, so you're part of this movement, which is arguing for back to basics. Um,
Yes.
Now, sounds to me like that is the message that you're trying to get to reach these 60%. That's the goal, right?
Yes.
Okay. Do you mind telling me a little bit about this back to basics thing people might be interested in?
So it stems from seeing community satisfaction surveys. I'm just looking at Surf Coast metrics here. On the whole, slowly decline in terms of support for the direction that council has. And what I have learned being in the political space for a number of years now is that articulating your utopian vision generally doesn't get received well, because there's a whole lot of assumed knowledge that you need to understand how that would function. Like if I was to talk about voluntary contribution of rates or privately managed kindergartens, some people can't understand how that could function, because the assumed knowledge is that because there would be less taxation in a libertarian environment, people would have more money to spend on the things that they value themselves, rather than utilising the socialist methodology in everyone chips into the bucket and then that bucket gets divvied out however they see fit.
Yeah. I mean, and I mean that requires some level of understanding of like economics and free markets, and we know that the powers that be, your governments, your councils, your education sector, all of these work very hard to have people know the wrong things, like have an incorrect understanding of how the free market works and how the relationship between public and private
Correct.
works, and why the private sector actually is better for everyone. So what does
And
back
not
to
not
base?
only that, but basic civics is also another subject that has been waning in recent years. So one, people don't understand the consequences of their actions, but two, they don't actually understand how to remedy them if they understood what was happening on an economic level.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. And yeah, I would agree with that. Um. So what is the back to basics movement, and what are the kind of broad policies? Like, what are you selling to voters?
So in terms of simplistic messaging,
Yeah.
focusing on the roads and basic infrastructure, supporting Christmas and Australia Day,
Okay.
supporting women-only spaces. There's some councils that have moved under the guise of inclusivity and diversity to
Yeah.
remove women-only spaces from public toilets. Um, but it goes far deeper, because let's say grants, for example. That's one area that I have a very, very strong focus on opposing, because what happens is we end up through the rate system taking money off people who are working, that can't afford to put food on the table, and utilizing that money to go to an artist or a social program, something that most people, if you ask them, is this a good idea? Most people would say yes. But it's how the funding is secured and where it's going to is what really bothers me. And what I aim to do with this Back to Basics team is give the community a better understanding of where their money is coming from and where it is going. And if we can reduce our spending in what I would see as a discretionary area and redirect that to the basics, we end up with roads that don't have large amounts of potholes. We end up with stormwater systems that function. We end up with Ramsar accredited wetlands not getting damaged by the incorrect planning of previous councils.
And so it does sound like there is some pretty significant misallocation at the very least. So if we're talking about is council doing their job adequately, councils on the whole, I obviously don't mean individual councillors who are trying to do the right thing,
Yeah, yeah,
but
yeah.
there are significant shortfalls at the expense of, caused by these poor choices that they make. And I think that the artist one or the art installation, or we see them all the time. They're everywhere. These sort of public art installations.
Yeah.
I think is a great example that you can really, in sort of two questions, you can break it down, right? Like, do you think this is a good idea? Sure, most people would think, yeah, that's a nice looking sculpture or
Yeah.
whatever. I love to see it. Two, would you pay for it? No. Like, what do you mean? Of course, I don't want to pay for it. This doesn't increase value in my life more than, whatever amount of money I'd be using to put food on the table or to buy myself something or to
Yeah.
save or whatever it is, especially in a time of, economic crisis like we're in. And that kind of gets to the core of it, right? Like if you are not willing to spend money on something, then you don't care whether that thing exists or not, even if it does look nice or whatever. And that's a basic insight, which I think most people would agree with if you get the chance to talk to them and ask them these two questions. But if you only ask them the first one, then it's easy to take all the money you want and spend it on
Yep.
all the frivolous things that you want that make you feel good and make you
Because
smile.
most people are not paying attention.
Well, yeah, and I mean, as I said at the start, I myself am guilty of paying less attention to council than I do to other government departments, and I think that is pervasive across everyone, right? Like that
Yeah.
there is far less attention paid there. Um,
Look at that. You are heavily politically aware, heavily involved, and yet you don't know what's going on. So I think it would be a safe assumption to say that 95% or more of people have zero idea of what's going on in their council.
well, and that's how dangerous is that, right? Like that you have complete, almost complete. Like there's 5% of people keeping you accountable for what you do, and
Yeah.
95% are oblivious as to whether you're doing well or
Yeah.
poorly.
I
Um,
think actually need to increase that percentage. I think honestly it would be 99% because let's say we've got a little under 50,000 people as residents in the Surf Coast Shire. There would be maybe 10, maybe 20 at most that would hold council to account.
right, there you go. There's your percentage. It's even lower than
Yeah.
1%. Um, which is, I mean, great for the councillors who want to do whatever they want, but that does suck for for the rest of us. Uh, Now, from what we mentioned before we started recording, but this back to basics. What would you call it? A movement? You would call it a group? What would you call it?
I think it's a bit of a movement at the moment. There's some people in the local area who will be running as candidates utilising that phrase. Um, and I think they'll be utilising that honestly. I have seen reports of some people utilising the phrase that have a political alignment that has been causing some of these issues. So I think it's going to be really important for voters to pay close attention to what is being said, what has been done, and what overarching philosophy guides the candidates.
So, are we talking like Labour, Liberal, Greens aligned people using that same
Yeah,
expression of back to basics?
yeah. So
Be-
if you were to grade them, you would probably say the Greens would be least aligned, followed closely by Labor. Liberal, depending on the candidate, would maybe have some merit, but yeah, just because someone says something doesn't mean they're necessarily going to follow through with it.
and in politics, less so than anywhere else in life. Yes, I completely agree with you. Um,
Yeah,
But I mean, some silver lining there is okay, if these groups that don't believe at all really in back to basics, or some will tangentially believe in back to basics, are using this expression, this term, um, we can assume that it's because there is some significant appetite in the community for a return to back to basics. You know, you hear all the time,
Yep.
rates, roads, rubbish. Like that's what we want our council to
Yes.
do. Don't want it to be doing anything else. So it sounds like there is a big appetite because they're all trying to pander to the same people. Unfortunately, it then becomes much more difficult for people to recognize the difference between an actual back to basics candidate and someone
Yeah.
who's just using the expression. So, how do people tell the difference between this group that you're a part of and the broader panderers?
Well, we've created a bit of an unofficial team, Surf Coast Back to Basics team, and we've been fully transparent with our shared policies. So we've got a 21-point policy plan that we've put up. We are introducing the candidates via that page, and it is unequivocally clear what we stand for. If there's anyone else running on a back to basics ticket and they are not being fully transparent with what policies they want to enact, then they need to get that sorted so that the voter base can have clarity on how they're voting.
Now, this 21-point policy plan, is this on a website?
It's on our Facebook and Instagram. So if you search Surf Coast Back to Basics team, you'll find that, and scroll down, you'll find our policy suite. But it covers everything over economics, services, governance, social areas, and diversity of opinion. Because the last policy on our suite is highlighting the fact that we're all independent people and have free choice to vote any which way on topics not specified. Because the reality is councils do so much, and it would be impossible to have a suite of policies that more than two people would vote on. So we've kept it reasonably tight at 21. And yeah,
Yeah, well, cool.
hopefully we'll get a few more people on the team.
I'll make sure I'll put all the links to all of that stuff in the description. So if you are interested in checking more of that out, just have a look below, and you can find the full 21 points. I won't run through all 21 points, but what are some of
Yeah.
the more interesting ones? I think you already mentioned like the women's only spaces, the protecting women's only spaces, the fixing the roads. What other ones would you think are most interesting that people would think, hey, yes, definitely 100%?
Something that most people wouldn't be aware of but might appreciate is that many councils, in order to silence individual councillors, change their governance rules to require two councillors to sign off on a notice of motion to get an agenda item up.
Wow, okay. So the
So
lone voice in a council is completely disempowered.
stifled. Yeah. So point number 16 of our policy is that we will support individual councillors to raise notices of motion. Fortunately, in this council, since I was elected as a free speech advocate, I've supported supported other councillors to get notices of motion up, both on topics that I agree with and I disagree with, so that those topics can be debated in the chamber. So that rule has largely been circumvented by my election. But what I'd love to be able to do is create a foundation where even people that I disagree with can get their items on the agenda, have it debated, have the decision made, and then move on, so that we can empower those people that represent 10 to 12% of their community to get their items on the agenda.
Well, that's all well and good that you're helping other people get their items on the agenda, but what if, I mean, I would imagine the most out of the circle voice in that council is probably you. Have you garnered enough goodwill among your colleagues that they'll help you get items on the agenda now, thanks to what you've done, or are you getting
There's
stifled out?
one, but she's retiring, and I'm hoping that with this team we can fill the void that she's created by retiring, and increase the representation with other aligned people.
Okay, that's good. So this group sounds like it's quite there's quite a bit of momentum behind it, and a few people. So is the idea that you're going to kind of counter saturate the ticket with lots of actual genuine pro freedom, pro free speech, back to basics advocates on the ticket, so it won't just be filled with lefties?
That would be the aim, but as I hinted before, is that because of the cohort that want to be left alone not getting involved, I think we'll see at least an increase in that sort of choice for Surf Coast. Hopefully, other councils in Victoria. There's a little phrase that I adopted when I was in the military: if not you, then who? If not now, then when? And that has resulted in me putting a hand up for way too many things, biting off way more than I can chew and just chewing like a madman. And what I'd hope to do is instill that philosophy in like-minded people across Victoria to run for council so that we can have a solid field to at least equal that of those that disagree with us, so that then voters are given a proportionate choice. Okay. Whether that happens is up to individual people to choose whether or not they run for council.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So
and if you don't run, yeah, and if you don't run for council, you are just supporting the status quo to continue on. No pressure.
Okay, well, all 13 of our viewers will now jump on board and join a council race, and we'll saturate something.
Yes.
No, that's a good point, and I mean, and I do understand. It's kind of I don't know. I feel like libertarians, we're so addicted to losing elections, right? Like we lose federal elections and we lose state elections, and we, not just here in other countries, we lose all over the place. But council is the one place where we could actually win elections, and it,
yes.
It can happen. And clearly, I mean, you've won one and hopefully win again. This should be the place where we get our kicks, right? We can actually make some small modicum of difference, or relatively large modicum.
Yeah.
And win something,
Yeah. And not only here, but in New South Wales, many of your viewers would probably understand that the Liberal Party failed to submit around 150 council candidate nominations. So that means that our cousins in the Libertarian Party in New South Wales are very well positioned to get a number of candidates elected in positions that Liberal Party candidates might have otherwise occupied.
That's good. That is good news. So a bit of a libertarian wave. If you are in New South Wales, do it. Run for council. So what does, because I mean we all get the big charade of the federal and state elections and posters and advertising and all this all over the place. Council, correct me if I'm wrong, but it feels like it's much more of an even playing field, because I mean everyone's budget for this kind of thing is far lower. Everyone runs much more localized on the ground,
yes.
kind of face-to-face campaigns. So what does that look like, the campaigning for council election? What have you been doing?
A lot of it involves grassroots movement, getting people to offer their properties to host signage, donating if they can chip in a little bit, but really just getting out there, meeting people, knocking on doors, showing that there's a genuine alternative for us to offer the community.
Yeah. Okay. And so the first time, what was the year of when you were elected the first time?
2020.
Okay, right. What a year. A great year to was it before or after the end of the world?
During.
Oh, during the end of the world. Wow,
yeah.
That's were you allowed to campaign outside? Was it illegal?
We could campaign outside. I did outside shops and all that sort of stuff, but it was challenging.
Yeah, I can imagine, especially right at the start with the fervor of all of that. I'm sure you were a super spreader at all those events. So
definitely.
You accelerated the end of the world. So thank you for that.
But I was a super spreader of hope, and I ended up getting elected. So
that's a great line. Yes.
Yeah.
So
because no, honestly, just on that that topic, while the world does go into turmoil, it is very easy to lose hope, but there's always a choice. And whether it's a choice to support a candidate, to be a candidate, to run, to get elected, to have your say in chambers, there's always a choice.
And I would just add to that that as libertarians, I know, I mean, we swim in the libertarian circles quite frequently, and I mean, most of the viewers of the show, I would imagine, are at least libertarian leaning. There does tend to be this tendency to be negative about, you have a negative outlook on the world because we see everything that's wrong with it, and no one listens to us and no one agrees with us. But I think that you're right. That's not going to convert people. Telling everyone that we're all screwed. No, I mean that doesn't. Some people that'll convince, and some people will be awoken by that. But it does need to be a message of hope for a certain proportion of society that there is some chance to change things. You know, it's not just a waste every time you go and vote. There is stuff that we can do. There is, and not just voting. There's all sorts of stuff that we can organize. So no, I'm with you. That message of hope is certainly a large proportion of society. That's what they need to hear to even be willing to have that conversation with
Yes.
us. Dare I ask, and I feel free not to respond. How close was it when you were last elected? Was it like a barely scraped through thing? Was it a comfortable
Within
thing?
100 votes. So if 100 voters went another way, I wouldn't have been on, and it would have been someone else filling that spot that would not have been as strong in opposing the direction of council.
Okay,
That
and
I can
and
guarantee you.
is 100 votes like, I mean, obviously 100 votes isn't very many, but council is I mean, there's a lower threshold for votes
Yeah.
in general. Is 100 votes considered like a super razor thin margin, or is it
Yeah.
reasonable?
So my vote was just under 1,500.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's like 5% or something like that.
Yeah. Okay. So
Yeah.
pretty razor thin. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, I would imagine you've made more of a name for yourself like this time round. Like you'll people at least know who you are significantly better, and you also ran at the federal and state elections for the Libertarian
Yes.
Party. So that your profile in the community is significantly lifted.
Yes.
How are you feeling about heading into this election? I don't need predictions or anything. Obviously, we
Yeah.
don't want to jinx anything, but how are you
Yeah.
feeling? Like, is there more recognition, that sort of stuff?
Yes. But what is more surprising is that because I've been making decisions based on principle,
Okay.
rather than being known as the libertarian, there's a lot of people that have referred me just as a community-minded guy,
Okay.
because in their view, my decisions very much align with a large segment of the community. So their view of my libertarian principle-based decision making is that I'm just a community-minded guy,
Yeah.
which is pretty powerful.
Well, that's great. Like, if people associate, the libertarian message with someone who looks after their fellow man, like that is kind of the caricature of libertarianism that we're always contending with is like, oh, you just don't want to pay taxes because you don't care for anyone. And it's like,
Mm.
well, no, actually, there's 7 other steps beyond that. We actually don't want to pay taxes
Yes.
because we think those taxes are spent in a way that makes everyone's lives worse. And if you spent that money yourself, and if private businesses did the things that the state does, everyone's life would be better. But that takes 20 minutes to have that conversation with someone, and then they don't believe you anyway. So if people are associating your, I suppose let's call it brand, your way of deliberating libertarianism to council as a pro community thing, that's awesome. Like with that, we should definitely be leaning into that.
Yes. Definitely.
Cool. That's great to hear. I mean, yeah, you're inspiring me with hope, Paul. This is
Excellent.
and I tend to lean towards the negative side of everything's screwed anyway. So this is good.
Well, as
Um,
a fellow ANCAP, I know that you struggle in the way society is shaped at the moment. It might not align fully with what you view as utopia, but hope for the best, expect the worst, take what comes, but more importantly, focus on what's in your control.
uh, That's not only a libertarian, but an ANCAP in council. That's even more filling me with hope.
Yes.
Um, Let me divert a little bit from just the council talk for a second, because as you're an ANCAP, you're a good libertarian. There's lots of we could talk about a lot of philosophy and economics and that sort of stuff. But
Yep.
one thing I did want to kind of knuckle down on is, I think. Right. So you've mentioned that this silent majority, 60%, probably agree with us, or agree with us at least on that idea of wanting to be left alone.
Yeah.
But there is this very deliberate push to have people not understand what actually ails the world, what actually causes the problems,
Yes.
inflation, for example. Um, so given the limited platform that we all have, even an elected member like David Limbrick, like has a very limited platform, in that he can only get so much media attention, and he only gets so much time to get the message out, and it's so filled with these lies. So what would be the thing, or a couple of things, feel free to go as many as you want, if you could if you could get everyone's attention for 10 minutes, everyone in the world,
Yep.
or everyone in Victoria's attention for 10 minutes, and get them to understand one thing which would, or a few things which would help shift their worldview from what we perceive as the status quo, to understanding why the way we view the world would actually be better for everyone. What would those things be? What are the biggest misunderstandings or blind spots that you would fix?
Um, Firstly, the prerequisite to this is that the individual doing the advocacy has engaged with the community and understands what the hot button topics are. Because, like for you and me, inflation is the key driving force of the cost of living pressure. But a lot of people, even if you had an hour with them, might still struggle to understand how they can remedy that.
Okay.
So my strategy that I employ to very good effect is to engage with the community, find out what the hot button topics are, look at it through the lens of libertarianism, articulate the solution in lay terms, and that has been super effective in building public support. Because rather than talking about the issues that I care about, as an elected representative, it's important that you talk about the issues that your constituency care about. And if you go off on a tangent talking about something else, you've lost them. And if you articulate it in a way that requires a year 12 level of understanding of economics or psychology or any other related piece of assumed knowledge, you're going to lose them.
Okay. But are you not finding, so I mean, I suppose, what are you finding are typically some of the examples of these hot button issues that people repeat more often?
You're going to be pretty surprised. Car parks.
I'm very surprised. I was not thinking car parks. What's the libertarian solution to car parks?
Well, the libertarian solution is paid car parking, ultimately privatised. But given the current climate, choices are a result of trade-offs. And at the moment, there's a bit of a push to prioritise bicycles over car parks, which is resulting in a loss of car parks, at least in the Surf Coast, probably elsewhere, like Melbourne City Council. I think it was many years ago, they took away a whole bunch of car parks for bicycle lanes. And that hits people. And it might sound funny, but car parks are a primary driver of economic activity. As someone that would advocate for paid parking, it needs to be done on balance. So if you look at an area and there's X amount of parks and some get taken away for bicycles, the reality is there's going to be less opportunity for people to park, to go into the shops, to spend the money. So that's where free street car parking does have some merit in terms of boosting local economic activity. But in the most recent walk around that I did to all the shops, that the primary concern was car parking, because shop owners know if a customer can't get to the shop, they can't spend the money.
Well, and that's like, I mean, my instinct was to laugh, but I mean, it does make complete sense. And in fact, I would not be surprised at all to find that, I mean, here in Ballarat, in my local area, and I'm sure there's lots of other, like, I'm sure that would actually be one of the top issues around here as well, is the limited access to the CBD, especially like the sort of areas where we want high foot traffic or high, traffic, and then people going into shops.
Yeah.
Um, well, that is not what I was expecting. But what I kind of was thinking was, have you not been hearing more um, in recent times? People actually talk about inflation as one of their top hot button issues. Does
No,
that come up on your level? Really? So
no.
people,
When it comes to macroeconomics, most people are blind. April last year, in my councillor column in the local paper, I hinted at a recession, given that we were starting to get into per capita recession.
yeah.
I had a number of people complain to me for using the term recession, but I would much rather people be a little bit scared but prepared, as opposed to flying blind and not being prepared for what is coming.
I mean, yeah, I mean, we are definitely heading towards a recession. Like there's no denying that, and potentially are already in one that they're just hiding the
Yeah.
figures better. Um, uh, that's really surprising. I mean, they wouldn't necessarily call it inflation, but are people not up in arms about cost of living? Like, is that not anyone's top issue? I mean, maybe it's not a council thing so much.
Yeah, not really. So obviously inflation impacts cost of business,
Mm.
impacts projects that council are offering, um, impacts pay rises for staff. Um, but then you're operating in an environment where in Victoria councils have rate caps, and there's a lot of people that I think would support abolition of the rate caps, and I do in principle, but I don't in practice, because I don't trust that councils would constrain their spending in an uncapped environment.
Right, so rate caps at the moment means that councils can't expand the amount of rates that they're taking from people. Right,
Correct.
that's
Well,
what I'm
not,
assuming it means.
yeah. So it's roughly around inflation, but, uh, well, typical levels of inflation. But because inflation is getting out of control and will do, like, I've been warning that long-term economic forecasts are cooked, because their assumptions are that inflation is going to be kept under control. But if you've been looking at federal money supply over the last 5 years, it's just about quadrupled, and the cost of an apple has not quadrupled.
Yeah.
So either we are going to see a long-term sustained level of high inflation, or a shorter period of much higher inflation. And I think politically, you are not going to get any state or federal political leaders that are going to take that short-term, harder option, which is going to result in us all experiencing that long-term delay.
Yeah, you're completely right on that, and there's a part of me that also thinks that yes, that they use. I mean, we talk about the RBA uses the blunt tool of uh, interest rates, raising interest rates to curb inflation, but there is this feeling that like even that is not having the effect that they want to have in many. Like I don't know if they can even control whether it ends up being a sudden sharp jump or whether it is this slow high, 5%, 10% a year for
Yeah.
10, 20, 30 years or whatever it may be. I don't even know if they're capable of controlling that. It's yeah. The no, I
But are you
think
suggesting external market manipulation is ineffective?
yeah, something like that. That's something like what I'm suggesting. No, I think that it's a very low risk. It might not have high rewards, I mean, ever or certainly at the moment, but it's a very low risk gamble to be the doomsday forecaster with inflation because without a shadow of a doubt, you're going to be right. Like you are going to be correct by continuing down that line. Whether people recognize that or whether people are willing to believe you, I think is more to the point. I think. And that's kind of the part of the libertarian. Yeah, sorry, you go.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head whether people are going to believe you. So our financial officers in council rely heavily on government financial modelling. And if the government is not being honest in that modelling, you're going to see all these councils running on either incomplete or incorrect data
Hmm.
for their modelling.
Yeah, and government can't be honest about this because it would tear apart the whole facade of how people think it works, right? Like they don't think that it runs at an enormous loss and that we are going to have financial ruin because of it. Like they can't admit that. So you are going to be running off incorrect or incomplete data.
Yeah,
The point I was making is I think that's the where the pessimistic libertarian in me comes out is the fact that even in this high inflation and that's without even bringing up the fact that there's all the talk of censorship and increased control over individuals and interfering in all aspects of life and all the public sector expanding and the private sector shrinking, et cetera, et cetera. Even with these extreme conditions, um, people still swallow the lies. People are still willing to believe this false government narrative, and it's not yet enough to break them out of that. That's how would you frame that as a message of hope, considering that we need people to wake up and we need them to wake up relatively soon if there's any chance of averting or at least softening this crisis?
yeah. Well, it goes back to what I talked about before, going back to those hot button topics. As hard as it is for someone that understands macroeconomics with a predisposition to free market outcomes, I need to bite my tongue and talk to people about what matters to them,
Yeah.
get them to understand the benefits of this principle based decision making that values liberty on that particular topic. And then slowly but surely, if they share those same values, they then come around. Because a lot of people won't, well, there'll be some people that don't share those values, but there'll be plenty of people that do. And it's just about framing it in a way that they understand on an issue that matters to them that'll bring them around. So for me, I was not born a libertarian. There was a particular issue that I was facing that then when I learned of the libertarian solution, then I became, well, I think it's clear that I became quite passionate about the whole movement and have had a leadership role in that because I see it's a way to remedy so many ills of the modern world. But it doesn't matter if you have the perfect elixir, and libertarian is not the perfect elixir, but they're not going to take it unless they can align themselves with it.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to that. So I mean, if there's one big takeaway which I would suggest we is a credit to you and your message is the fact that yes, um, I've heard it before. I don't actually know you may have come. I don't even know who came up with this expression, but I've heard it a few times. It's the idea, the notion that everyone's a libertarian on at least one thing, right?
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely. Yeah.
like even your most fervent inner city greenie is probably a libertarian on something. I don't know, maybe
Yeah.
legalizing marijuana or something. And
Or
if
their choice in coffee or something abstract like that.
yeah, because forced authority is fundamentally so wrong that it will eventually encroach on something someone cares about that they don't want it to encroach on.
Yes.
And I guess yeah, we sort of I mean that's a good message. We all have to bite our tongue and we all have to stop talking about the macroeconomics and central banks and currency manipulation and all of this to begin with, and get people interested in the libertarian thing on their own issue. And I mean, there's a
Yeah.
thousand of them, right? Like I'm sure well, you're the one on the streets doing the campaigning and stuff. I'm sure there's a thousand that you encounter on a given day.
So one of the issues that got me elected back in 2020 was a classic libertarian issue. The council had placed in temporary road closures. Now, anyone that's familiar with libertarianism will understand that there's no more permanent solution than a temporary government program. And because of this temporary solution, it was causing a massive amount of heartache for many people. The first thing that I did, well, throughout my campaigning, was resolve to get those removed. On getting elected, that was one of the first things that I was able to achieve. And then it was clear that I was on the outer for everything else. So I got one small win in, but then had 4 years of struggle. Depending on the outcome of this year's election, we might see that struggle be reduced. But the reality is that, like, it wasn't economic, it wasn't to do with their rates. It was just simply about they wanted to be able to drive on the roads.
Yeah, well, and I think I don't know. I find that libertarians in general, we aren't it doesn't come super naturally
I've
to
lost
us
you.
to. Oh, you've lost me now.
I've lost you for. Do you want to go back 15 seconds?
Yeah, yeah, no worries.
Do you want to go back 15, 20 seconds?
Yeah, yeah, I can do that. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah, cool.
Yep.
Yeah, I feel like we as libertarians, it doesn't come super natural to us to kind of, I don't know if lower ourselves isn't the right expression, but to set
Adjust our
aside,
perspective.
yes, to adjust our
So it's
perspective
sort of
to.
like, imagine if you're a university economics lecturer and you're talking to someone in grade 7.
Yeah,
You adjust your teaching methodology. And you've got a teaching background, yes?
I am a teacher, yeah, so I would hope so.
Yeah. So you know better than others. You would have both basic, intermediate, and high level content to deliver. If you deliver that high level content to that basic class, it'd get nowhere. You've got to start with the foundational blocks. And when we are dealing with a large percentage of the voter base that doesn't have that basic knowledge in civics or economics, it is a waste of time to be talking about those macro issues until you've got that basic foundation established.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's like, yeah, trying to talk to your year 12s the way that you'd talk to your year 7s or vice versa, like that, instinctively you'll know that it's not breaking through, like it's not getting through. We have to adjust.
Yeah.
And I mean, it can be more difficult because members of the public, you can't tell at a glance how much they're going to understand or how much. Sometimes they can get offended if you go into too simplistic to them. They want to have a bigger conversation, or you
Yeah.
start too high and they're like, "What do you mean, man? I just want to drive my car." Like,
Yeah.
um, yeah. So I mean, I can imagine it's a long and arduous struggle, that of campaigning in the wild with all the wide variation that we have among our people. Um,
Absolutely.
we are at about the hour mark now. I did want to. Do you think there was anything that I've missed or that I haven't asked that you thought was important that you want to share about council or about anything before we wrap up?
Probably one of the most important things is to be engaged. Most, if not all, councils will stream their meetings. So have that stream on in the background while you're cooking dinner or lazing around the lounge. You don't have to pay close attention to it, but something might be said that sparks your attention. If you're not following and the media don't report on it, you are likely going to be blissfully unaware of what's happening. So what I was talking about with the women only spaces, a couple of years ago, council started the process, and that resulted in hundreds of submissions being made with 97% opposition, and the council still proceeded with that recommendation to remove the prohibition. So there were quite a lot of people that were engaged, but rather than hundreds of submissions, if there were thousands, that potentially could have swayed the decision.
Yeah.
So the biggest thing I can encourage people to do that are politically aware is not just to be aware of what's happening, what's in the paper, but listen, watch what is happening in your local area, because it's one of the easiest levels of government to influence. So you might very well bump into your local councillor when you go to the shops. If you've been paying attention and saw something go in a direction that you didn't like, and you can have your say in the vegetable aisle with that councillor, that is going to be far more effective than having a whinge on social media about your state or federal representative voting in a way that you didn't agree with.
Yeah, that's very true. I mean, yes, your proximity to having an actual voice is much higher, I guess. That's a good point. All right. Well, I mean, I think that was good. I wish you all the best in the upcoming election. I encourage anyone who's in the Surf Coast Shire to vote for Paul Barker, or whoever is your back to basics in your local area, or libertarian, or the people who are fighting the good fight in your local area. I'd say I'd encourage we all get behind them, because there is some scope for improving things, and that's always good.
There's always opportunity.
There's always,
even if it doesn't look like it, there's always opportunity.
That's exactly right. So, look, I'll post everywhere people can follow you and the Back to Basics and all the rest in the description. So check out Paul and everything he's got to say there with us. As always, you can follow us on YouTube, Instagram, Spotify, and Twitter. Thanks again for your time, Paul. It's been good. We will catch you next time.
Excellent. Thank you, DFTBA. See ya.